So, noted commentator and Instagram personality Lowko TV tried making a balance patch for SC2. It is less of a balance patch and more of balance ideas. It is a little light on the specifics, but surprisingly heavy on some other specifics. So anyways, instead of going over these myself, I will let Harstem talk about them while I talk about Harstem talking about them. But I want to do some fun predictions. Now, you may have already seen my changes. I will probably reference them. Many of them are similar, partially because some of them are based on the same thing, partially because a lot of people have similar ideas on improvements to the game. And I think everyone involved in this wants the game to be more fun to play and to watch, and has slightly different opinions on how to go about that, but interesting ones as well. So first off, I'm just going to give my thumbs up, thumbs down. Lurker speed burrow is stupid. Burrow slower. Thank you. That's a little bit of editorializing, but good idea. Reduce ultra size. Good idea. Broodlord movement speed. Not great. Plus 5, 10 HP on Hydras. Microbial Shroud sticks to a unit. Double thumbs up.
Hello guys and girls, today we will be talking about a topic I generally tend to avoid, and that is balance, and we're doing it in a serious manner. Lowko recently published this little list that he has here on Twitter, and he called it the balance patch for 2022 Starcraft, aka Lowko's
Starcraft 2 Lowko. There's another Starcraft. Don't get the brood with the 4 people who play Brood War mad at you.
And maybe I'll add
in
some
English
suggestions of my own as well. We can talk a bit about balance, or I'll talk a bit about balance, and you guys can listen. So, starting with Lowko's changes here. For Zerg, he said, the lurker speed burrow is stupid, burrow slower. This is a pretty reasonable change. It feels weird that a unit that I think can be described as a siege unit with very large range is so quick at getting up from siege locations.
It was obviously inspired by drilling
claws. A little
claws.
bit too small, and a small nerf there, I wouldn't mind. Second one is to reduce the ultra size by 10 to 20% so they don't derp as much. I genuinely also believe this to be a good change. Most of the time, quality of life changes that make the game slightly easier, but it don't influence balance too much, I don't think it's much of an issue for me. I always found it very annoying that Archons never managed to get to the one hole in your gateway wall either. It always pissed me off. I wouldn't mind that change.
It is weird that Immortals can get through the same size wall, but Archons can't. I will say that is a little weird.
I think just making a small size reduction
I feel like they should be the same size.
The third change that Lowko suggests is the Broodlord movement speed buff upgrade in the Greater Spire. I think this is a bad call. The Broodlord is a unit. Balance-wise, I don't really have an opinion on this. Maybe they would be slightly too strong, but if we think about balance, then this might be a fine change. This is a change that you could suggest and we could test it. But if we think about game design, this is not something that we want, because Broodlords,
it feels like
generally don't really
it's trying to replace the lurker speed by giving Broodlord speed, which kind of defeats the whole purpose.
I think it's important not only to slightly change the balance in some ways, but also to look at the areas where there is problematic gameplay. And I think in the PvZ late game, there just is problematic gameplay. And
that is the way to put it, yeah.
Take a look at the things that we could remove from both races to make that less problematic. I think the Broodlord would be a key unit that you would want to remove from the Zerg side, because free units tend to provide very poor gameplay. Whenever we have,
if the Broodlord was a Guardian
in any type of matchup,
but
it tends to slow down the game a lot, make it a lot more boring, because one person most of the time is trading energy or small amounts of cheap units against the free units,
pretty smart.
Or they need to poke from a distance, like in the case with Tempest.
So but he's played this game before.
I'm just not a huge fan of a buff to the Broodlord speed. In general, I think we should scale back the late game capital ships, Carrier, the Broodlord. You could even maybe make a case that the battle cruiser.
Nobody's complaining about the battle cruiser.
We'll leave it as it is for now. But the Broodlord and the Carrier, I think.
Let the Bronze Leaguers have
them. If anything, we want to scale them back and really have a late game that is focused around these mid-game compositions, and then maybe supported with a couple of capital ships. Like a mothership can fulfill that role relatively well.
I think the mothership is a
the
cool
carry and the
example,
Bluebird are just
and it
units that
kind
don't
of has
provide
too,
very
it has too much
interesting gameplay,
momentum from the past
and
is the
buffing
problem.
these seems to be heading in the wrong direction. So that's where I first disagree with Lowko. His fourth point is +5/10 HP to Hydras. We've done this in the past. I have nothing against it. It makes them live a little bit longer in the mid game.
I think a
and
high
it might
tech
actually
upgrade.
serve a purpose of making them
They
more
have
useful
so many
going into that
upgrades,
later
but,
game
like,
phase. So I think these are fair
I
changes.
think you could
I'll
just
later
buff the
on
Hydra.
add a little bit of my own change, but first let's go over everything that Lowko has. It has to do with somewhat, in a systematic approach. Then for Terran, allow 2 Widow Mines in a medevac.
Whoa! No. You skipped the best change. Microbial Shroud sticks to a unit. This makes so much sense. The way Microbial Shroud works right now is anti-micro. Microbial Shroud on paper is pretty good against like Sky Toss or Liberators, but it forces you to stay clumped up, which has obvious other weaknesses. I think Microbial Shroud becoming just like a temporary buff for a unit, like Stim, for example, would be a cool idea. I think Stim is a good example, like a Stim, but as a defensive upgrade for Hydras. Like 10 seconds, you take 50% less damage, and that would give the Infestor a better roll. So this makes a lot of sense. Like, I hadn't thought of this at all. Like, I thought about how do we buff the Infestor, right? Like, and we give it the water balloons. But, I think the Microbial Shroud idea is something that makes a ton of sense and would be a buff to Hydras in and of itself. And make it less necessary to have these death ball based compositions. So he's not gonna is this a Harstem thing? Is just completely ignoring Microbial Shroud? Well, since it seems like he's going to the Terran changes, allow 2 Widow Mines in a medevac rather than 4. Well, let's just for reference. 2 transport slots, siege tank, slight buff, liberator, supply increase, ghost, snipe, slight nerf. There are some other options on the table here, but allow 2 Widow Mines and a medevac. I'm glad to see some solidarity. Battle cruiser, -1 supply. I don't think you need it. I don't think it's really a supply issue. Ghost, reduced HP is an interesting one. Make landed Vikings a core part. Okay. Can you tell Lowko most of his experience comes from either fighting Terran or watching cinematics? Because that seems to be most of this. Like, I want the Vikings to land and fight Ultras. No, that's the Heart of the Swarm cinematic. And then a battle cruiser comes. No! Stop!
4. I understand where this is coming from, as Widow Mine drops with the Drilling Claws are very frustrating to deal with. However, this also has implications against Protoss. This has implications against Protoss in the early game, against Protoss in the mid game, when Terrans often want to drop with like 3-4
You need a
mines
buff somewhere
in
if
3
you
to
do
4
that.
medevacs. If 2 entire medevacs would be filled up with 4 Widow Mines,
My
that
proposition
army all of a
is
sudden
reduce
a
build
lot
time of
weaker,
siege tanks.
And as that is one of the main threats that keeps Protoss honest, I don't
As
think
well
this is a
as
good
reverting
change.
the Void Ray in the early game.
Against Zerg, I don't think it would matter. Well, it would help against the Drilling Claws mine drops, but
People don't
I
really
don't
go
think it
for
would
Drilling
matter
Claws mine.
too much.
In the
So
later
I think
game,
it's a
it would
change
matter.
that does more harm than good, and thus I'm kind of opposed to it. I'm just more harm than good.
Vikings
Don't
+2 to bio.
Next
Just
change.
give
The battle
Vikings
cruiser
+2 to
-1 supply.
everything. Give them
Late
no
game battle
damage and
cruiser
then weird
switches
bonuses
to
against
elite.
everything.
I think the problem with the battle cruiser isn't
Wouldn't that be neat?
necessarily the supply as it is the time it takes to get the battle cruisers out. There's just a very large part in the game, if you're switching into battle cruisers, in which the BC, in which a
Sucks.
lot of supply is tied up and a lot of resources are tied up in a unit that isn't helping you yet. And with BCs, you kind of need to get the ball rolling. You need 4 or 5 in the late game maybe to make them useful. And I don't think the supply necessarily is the limiting factor, but the speed at which you can churn them out. So if our
Reactored
goal
battle
would be
cruisers.
to get more battle cruiser late game switches, I think that would be better achieved by lowering the time that it takes to get them. Because if we think about Protoss
You can't
and
do that,
Zerg
though.
late game
People are
units,
just gonna
the
rush
carrier with
battlecruisers
Chrono
again.
Boost comes out honestly
Ooh.
relatively fast. The Broodlord comes in stages, so you start with the Corruptor, which is a useful unit by itself, and then on top of that it goes into a Broodlord, but has a relatively quick morph time. So there's always some
Like,
use in the
you could always
supply
add an
that
upgrade.
you're already getting, and the
I'm not a
investment that
huge
you're
fan of
making.
adding
While
an
with
upgrade for
battlecruisers,
everything,
it's really
but,
all
like,
or nothing.
that's the
Similar
best way to
the carrier,
gatekeep
except
it.
the carrier just builds a bit faster. And I also feel like that 3 carriers provide more value to a big ground army than 3 battlecruisers do, because of the way that interceptors tend to interact with the opponent's army, forcing it to first attack the interceptors if an army is A-moved. So carriers tend to have a larger impact faster, and they're
I'm just
built
gonna
quicker.
assume
So
people have
I
watched
think
my
if you
video
wanna
on
get
proposed
seasonal in the late
changes.
game,
I
we
addressed
should be
this.
working all the time. That being said, I'm not
To
even
be
sure
clear,
we want
I made the changes
late-game
first before
capital ships
seeing any of
more
this.
than we currently have. I actually
But
kind
I'm
of
getting
like
some new
the
ideas
place that
too.
the battlecruiser is in, where it
I want to hear
serves
what
some purpose
Harstem,
with mech
like, what
in
suggestions he
PvZ,
actually has,
and
because
everything else we
he
don't
better
really
have
see
some
much. So it
actual
really has a
suggestions.
small niche in which this late-game capital ship, which is then being used in the early game, kind of as a harassment unit. I think it functions nicely, and it's in a decent spot. I think we should really go away from less capital ships rather than more. All right. Ghost. -10 to -20 HP. You can definitely see that Lowko is a Zerg here, because if you see TVZ, the Ghost kind of feels like a catch-all type of unit against Zerg. It's okay-ish against Broodlords, it's good against Lurkers, does well against Hydras. Just against Ling Bane at times it's not great, but because of their tankiness, it still tends
Honestly,
to be
the Ghost has 100 HP. A Marine has 55 with combat shield.
Nice siege lines. The game just slows
It
down a
it
little bit, and taking
doesn't die
cost-efficient trades for
too
Zerg
much.
becomes
Like,
very difficult. However, if you remove the tanking power of the Ghost, then all of a sudden, maybe in the late game, it just would be close to impossible to actually take good fights as a Terran. Walking into Lurker lines with less HP, fighting.
if only
Ling
there was
Bane.
some long-range unit.
It's really difficult
We
to
could.
say how much really leans on the health of the Ghost and how much leans on other factors like mines getting their hits. But it feels like, yeah, at maybe a 10 HP nerf would be good.
I like the nerfing of
Yeah,
the
it's hard
ability
to say.
to
We
do
could also
damage
maybe try
untouchably.
try nerfing that in combination with some type of Lurker.
I think the
damage
Ghost
output nerf, because
can be
without Ghost fighting
kind of
Lurkers is
tanky,
impossible.
but
So
the fact
if you
they can
nerf
get
the
away
Ghost in
with
strength,
murder
the Lurker will
is a
increase
bit
in
much.
strength, which is in my mind not necessarily a major imbalance, but it's just the Lurker versus Ghost interaction, or the Lurker versus the Terran army interactions. I don't think, especially by Terran players, are considered to be very fun. It is really difficult to fight
Yeah,
against Lurkers.
honestly, using
for a
Ghost
large
and Liberator
population
is...
of StarCraft 2, going up all the way to the very top.
He's
There's a
saying it.
couple, like maybe 3-4 Terrans that feel comfortable against Lurkers, but there's a lot of Terrans that just don't feel comfortable. The moment that Lurkers come out, their Ghost control maybe isn't top-notch, but yeah, there needs to be some alternative way, ideally, to deal with Lurkers that isn't just pure Ghost spam. And maybe nerfing Ghost is good, but then at the same time you need to couple that, I think, with a bit of a Lurker nerf. And I'm not sure if a Burrow nerf, in that case, a Burrow speed nerf is going to be good enough. We're going to need to see some damage reduction in any case, I think. Or even range reduction, perhaps not possible, but damage reduction, I think so. Anyway, I'm getting lost in my own thoughts. Let's continue with Lowko's essay. Somehow make landed Vikings a core part of Terran mech armies. Assault mode Vikings deal +2 damage. to
Okay,
Terran
okay. What the fuck? This one is just out of nowhere. Like, no. This is like a no. Like, are we just... Is everyone forgetting the siege tank? Apparently we're trying to remake the Heart of the Swarm trailer. Remember, Lowko's like, the tanks didn't do very well in the Heart of the Swarm trailer, so... The Viking looked like it had a shot. The Battlecruiser did well. I'm very interested to see how Harstem handles this. Because this sounds kind of ridiculous and out of... I have no idea where this came from. But this is completely original Lowko, and it... Like, it might be fine, but I think it sounds ridiculous.
or something like that. I don't have enough experience with mech to understand if that would make a difference. I have a feeling it wouldn't. So I think it's a rather the goal here of the change. I don't think gets achieved with what he wants. If
I
you
think
want
Harstem's just
mech
kind of
armies
confused.
to be
I don't-
better,
he's
I
like,
think we need to look at
Landed
perhaps the
Viking.
role of the Cyclone a little bit in that matchup as a mid-game control unit. But I don't think the Viking is where we want to be looking at changing mech in TVZ. Hyperflight rotors, Banshee speed upgrade cost reduction to 125, 125.
Sure. Yeah, fine.
I still don't think we'd see it used too much, right? We'd still only see it
I
with
think that's
mech
a free
because
buff.
It just takes up such a large part of your starport production in case you're playing bio. So maybe
I don't
see
think- yeah,
Banshees
I
being
agree.
used more
There's
as a
no-
starter for
it doesn't
mech,
really
but
do
once again,
anything.
because mech is so extremely unviable at the higher levels. I feel like that a buff to hyperflight
Because the tank isn't
rotors
strong enough.
wouldn't really do very much. I think one of the problems that mech really has for Terran is that in the mid game Zerg tends to be really free to kind of do whatever they want, and maybe we need to look a bit more at how cyclones interact with certain units.
Oh,
There, and
God.
how good
Bring back the
Ravager
machine
Link needs
guns
to
on the
be
cyclones.
against these Cyclone Hellion armies, especially when there's creep involved. What exactly that would be?
Mech
I
suffers
haven't
from
thought about
trying to
enough,
be
and I'm not
Brood War
knowledgeable
without
enough in
being
that
Brood
matchup,
War.
and especially with the situation.
Like,
to
the
really
Thor is like a
have any
super
good solutions
Goliath, but
that
the
would have come
Viking
from
is also
Darren's
filling the
original.
role of a
I'm
Goliath,
more
kind
familiar
of.
with
So,
that
like,
interaction. Protoss.
the Widow Mine is like a spider
Remove
mine
the
gone
High Templar
wrong.
water balloons. And what he means with the water balloons is the auto attack of the High Templar. Now, usually I mentioned
Okay. So, I think I am going to refresh because I have some significant. I think Harstem's going to have a lot of detail, and there's a big risk here. I haven't seen the video. I might look dumb because Harstem is by far a better Protoss and just generally a better player. I don't know how much he's thought about this. I'm sure a lot, but so I propose the Observer from the Nexus. That was actually I first saw Lowko with that idea like over a year ago. I think that's kind of a gimme. Everybody agrees with that one. The Warp Prism no longer can warp in until you get a Robobay upgrade. The Void Ray is nerf back. Back to where you were. Go back. Build Phoenixes again. That's my thought process. The Carrier, more supply. Now starts with all its interceptors. It takes longer to build. And interceptors have lower threat priority than the Carrier. Harstem was talking about how Carriers are good on support because they kind of screw up the AI of units. This would look to change that, though these are very experimental potential changes. And then I'm interested to see what Harstem has to say about Protoss Ground. Because part of the reason that SkyToss is so popular and feels like the option is because of Protoss Ground being weak in the later game. Like, you don't have many anti-lurker options. It's just better to go for Carriers and Storm than it is to go for really any gateway-based army. It's just more effective. So, at risk of angering every Terran player who for some reason thinks they need buffs, despite statistically probably should be nerfed overall, Stalker range upgrade on the Templar Archives, and Hardened Shields on the Robobay for Immortals, giving you stronger mid to late game. This doesn't really address the end game problem overall of why games eventually get to that stage. I also propose the Lurker being slightly nerfed on range, as well as the Queen gaining the Armored attribute, which is definitely the most questionable one. So that makes it less of an potential game-ending all-in option. So, with those said, like, I'm prefacing that because I'm interested to see what Harstem says about, because some of the changes are copy-paste here. And it leaves a lot out, because Lowko just kind of has, like, there are other things I would like to fix, but I don't know how. And so we'll see if Harstem fills in those blanks.
I think quality of life changes are always good. However, with the water balloons, it really feels like it just makes an army that already is very easy to control, which is an Airtos army with High Templars, even easier, where it just actually becomes movable, and afterwards you need to use the Templar. I think spellcasters should almost be forced to be in a separate control group. And this might sound
Can you
a
tell
little
he's a
bit
pro
elitist,
gamer?
where I'm saying if you can't control 2 control groups, that maybe you shouldn't be playing at the level that you're currently at, then that's fine. I think something should just be difficult, and I don't think all armies should just be movable.
Okay.
So I like the suggestion of either making it even
I
or
see that,
removing
okay.
it, but in this case,
I'm still in
very
favor
big
of
on
giving
just
everyone the
removing
water
High Templar
balloons.
auto
I don't
attack,
think that's where skill is.
as that honestly at the high level it shouldn't matter that much, and it makes the late game interactions between mainly Zerg and Protoss, but also maybe in some
And
cases
yeah, it doesn't
Terran
matter
and
that much
Protoss
at the
armies
top
a little
tier
bit,
because
a little bit
everybody's
more fair.
controlling well.
Because Terran do need a separate hotkey for Ghost.
This is
I
more
know
for
not every
everyone
Terran does
else
it,
to give
but
them
with
that.
some of you guys at home. But
Lowko?
ideally you do have a separate hotkey for Ghost, because otherwise stimming becomes difficult. You need to tap first. Revert the Void Ray build time to 37:43. I think this is
It's a gimme, I
a
think.
very good suggestion. I think the Void Ray isn't necessarily too powerful at the higher level, but I think there's a couple of issues with it. And in order to show that, I actually want to show you guys some stuff in-game. Okay, so when we use Void Rays against Zerg, especially in larger numbers, a big issue, especially at the lower levels, is bases that have some type of cliff next to them and then have another base close by. Because this forces the Zerg player to split queens. First of all, they need to perfectly split queens. They need to have a correct amount of queens in position, and they need to know that the Void Rays are coming from that direction as well. So imagine these Void Rays are flying here, and they start by attacking this base. You need to have half of your queens over here, and half of your queens
Part of
in
the
main
problem is
base.
queens are your only early game
However,
anti-air
the Protoss
defense.
player
Like,
only
it's more of a
really
core
needs
problem.
a single group of Void Rays to fly through. The movement is extremely easy.
Yeah, they
and
need
it
the
makes
movement
attack
needs to be reverted.
potentially very, very dangerous.
They used to be
because
20%
if the queens
slower.
are out of position, the Void Rays can just fly in. So this is something that often happens, is where queens will chase the Void Rays. Void Rays just use their prismatic alignment, take out this base, and then the queens need to walk around to get to the base. By the time they arrive there, the Void Rays are already done, and they can continue harassing other bases. A very small amount of Void Rays can force a very big reaction out of the Zerg. And also, it's a very difficult reaction out of the Zerg. The defensive measure here is
We
way
had this problem
harder
with
to
the
do
depths as
than
well.
the aggressive part, which makes the Void Ray, in my opinion, currently not a very fun unit to play against in ZVP from the Zerg side.
Has it
and
ever
also
been?
feels unfair in terms of what you need to do in order to execute it. At the highest level, this is less important because Zerg have very good map awareness. They have good queen spreads and queen splits already. And they tend to have Zerglings spread around the map, so they know where the Void Ray army comes from. But if you move anything below High Grandmaster, this task of just knowing where the Void Rays are coming from is extremely difficult. And if you fail,
This is
even
why
for just
Grandmaster
5
is half
seconds,
Protoss.
you immediately lose
50%.
a base. Or you lose 5,
Especially
6
on EU.
Overlords, straight up losing the game. While for the Protoss flying across the map, just controlling these units and doing that, cost very little effort.
I like
and
how
there's
much
almost no
detail,
downside.
like,
so
yeah.
there's very little risk.
I do want to say, I do appreciate, one, I don't think Harstem is a big Void Ray user himself, but he's an expert in how low-skill Protoss get way too high up the ladder, and he's sick of playing. Here's my cynical... I bet Harstem didn't even think about this for a second, but the reason Harstem is so adamant about this and willing to nerf the Void Ray and all that is because he's sick of playing PvP on the Grandmaster ladder. I'm on to you. You might not even know it. But the amount, like... So, let me just reference. This is Hero Marine's match history. This was, I believe, last season. Just a screenshot. So, yeah. Yeah. Donkey Toss with their stupid Void... No, I mean, he's explaining it very well. Battle Cruisers... When Battle Cruisers were first buffed, this was also an issue, like, in TVZ. When Battle Cruisers had the literally insta-cast teleport on a, 1-minute cooldown, it was a similar issue where the Zerg players just pinned in their base, hoping the battlecruiser, you can throw fucking spines at it enough that the battlecruiser gets uncomfortable with the situation and jumps away for free. This is a Protoss version of that, but the Zerg response is the same, because in Brood War, I keep coming back to Brood War because a lot of the things in SC2 are kind of trying not to exactly be Brood War, but in Brood War, you have Hydralisk as a tier 1 unit. The Queen is the tier 1 unit in SC2, but the Queen wears a lot of hats in StarCraft 2. And that has created this kind of awkward defensive and like pin down meta. And you have to build so many Queens to defend that you end up having to walk them across the map to do any damage. So, Harstem essentially, explaining that in surprising depth. Thank you.
Potentially very high reward. And for the Zerg, there is no reward to defending well. It's not like you can catch the Void Rays, you just deflect them. And this makes the Void Ray, in my opinion, just not a very good unit currently in the metagame. It doesn't promote fun gameplay very much. Add on to that, by the way, that often with Void Rays, there is a sure way to go into the late game by building disruptors, because the disruptor beats everything on the ground. The Void Ray beats basically everything else.
Void Ray disruptor,
and
who doesn't love him?
The only way you can beat this type of players by doing a very dedicated Queen Walk. You've kind of come into this stage in ZVP where the Zerg needs to decide to either early on Queen Walk the Protoss player, or they're forced into a late game. But mid-game timings are practically impossible. And with the Void Ray Disruptor combination on top of that, to end this all off with, it just becomes really easy for TOS to survive without having any good scouting knowledge. So usually what happens in a matchup is that there's a bunch of timings and all-ins that if you play well, you can defend against. But if you scout incorrectly or you're too greedy, it becomes difficult to defend against. With the Void Ray Disruptor, that's just not really true, because naturally you're investing so much into static because you only need very little production structures in like 2-3 Stargates, a robotics facility, and then the rest you can just build bases and cannons with, and you're just blindly producing units. Like, you can basically have a plan for the first 10 minutes in PvZ and 99% of the time survive. I think that is an issue. There needs to be some type of
He's explaining it way better than I could.
And that's currently not quite
and
the
with
case
more authority.
With these Void Ray openers.
I'm not even good enough to face disruptors that much. This is like a high-level thing.
Is that reverting the Void Ray build time?
Honestly, people just make more Void Rays and it's usually fine.
We could start looking at things like Flux Veins, making the higher numbers of Void Rays just a little less good because they don't have the speed upgrade, or just generally removing the speed of the Void Ray a little bit. There is one thing that I'm...
That sounds like a good idea to me. I mean, this might be a bit much, but I think there are other angles to look at. So, this would also address the cost. Like, part of the issue is not just the build time, but the movement speed, as was explained, and the cost. The intent of buffing the Void Ray, if you remember, is because it was supposed to be a mid-game unit. Right now, it dictates the entire early game, as Harstem just very eloquently explained. So, I think there's more opportunity there.
I'm worried about is that I didn't used to really like playing against a lot of the 16 pool Roach all-ins, and having a very quick Void Ray against that does feel pretty nice. So, in one way, I guess against 16 pool, it's a very niche scenario, and I probably shouldn't whine too much. But yeah, I feel
probably
like
shouldn't whine too much. Just not divide.
Put a lot of nerfs on the Void Ray, 2-3 different nerfs. Ideally, keep the cost the same, but make it slightly slower in general. Consider removing Flux Veins and increasing the Void Ray build time. I think would be a very good start to.
And
make
where
the
do you
PvZ
replace
game
it?
More reactive from the Protoss side. Make it easier for the Zerg as well to defend these multiple bases with Queens, especially at the lower level. And to make sure that the PvZ matchup isn't just a Queen Walk or late game type of scenario. There needs to be different shades of gray, basically, than just white and black in this case. I think that's really, really important. If there's one thing that I wish that Blizzard changed, it would be that. Just having a look at that.
The legacy of the Void Ray is painful.
But we'll continue
right
with the Lowko list, as I kind of went off on a tangent. All right, increase the cooldown on battery overcharge a little. I think that's also a good thing. Being capable of using the battery
think
overcharge multiple
decreasing-
times with the same defense seems like a
decreasing
bit much.
the
And
time
also
it lasts
forcing out a battery overcharge doesn't feel like a very
would
big thing
be
anymore. So
maybe better.
I do believe that
It depends on which angle you
want
wanna
to
go.
cooldown on battery overcharge a little here is a good suggestion. I like that. The Colossus damage from 10 plus 5 versus light to 11 plus 4 versus light. So a slight buff to the Colossi, to the general
Did Lowko
damage
do
output.
some math on this, or
I
is it
don't
just
mind
like
it,
a
honestly.
general thing?
Might make it a bit harder for Terrans to defend certain mid-game pushes. I'm seeing some potential issues with Phoenix Colossi 8K type of stuff to be harder, which is already a relatively low skill all-in that requires a lot to defend. Whenever I think about balance or about how I'd want to change the game, I would want to make I'd want to make things a little bit harder where they're currently too easy to either just survive into a late game situation, or when there's an all-in that can just be really easily executed without much thought. Perhaps you also want to think about not buffing that too much. So I'm not sure exactly what the goal here is because he didn't state it. I guess they would be better against roaches and marauders. They still wouldn't
It's
be
to
used
balance
in-
out the void
in
rate. It's
PvP.
obvious because even Lowko
So,
realizes,
yeah,
you got to
I'm
give
not
them
entirely
something.
sure about this. I'm not.
This is giving them
naturally
something.
opposed,
Give them
but
1 damage to
I'm
some
also not
other units that nobody
naturally
builds.
for it.
And not even damage,
kinda
just
neutral, I
flat
guess, in a way.
damage.
We
Just
can
no
try it,
longer
see what
bonus
happens.
damage.
Next,
This is as
the
far as
observer can be
Lowko
built
is willing
from
to go to
Nexus
buff
once the robot
Protoss.
facility is built. This is a cool suggestion, which I'm really surprised that Lowko suggests this, because this is a Protoss specific issue. This is something that a Protoss would say, and then the other two races say, "Oh, that sounds stupid." But this is a really
I don't think
cool
anyone
change, because
thinks that
often
sounds
in-
stupid.
In any matchup,
That's racist,
honestly,
Harstem.
the observer feels like a waste of your robotics facility time to build, because you want to be getting immortals, prisms, and you're often giving something up in terms of vision in order to get other things. Now, I think this is not necessarily that bad as a trade-off. I actually think that is not
It's
that
not even
bad
really
of
a
an
buff.
idea. That there is a trade-off for getting more vision. Now, of course, there's still
It's
a
a
trade-off if you have Nexi, because then you're cutting probes, but because, yeah, I don't know. It feels like you have more options to get a lot of vision, and especially against Terran, I think this could be slightly problematic. If you want to increase the amount of observers that are being built, there needs to be more of a downside of observers. Make them more clear for people to see, even when they're invisible. Make there be a little bit of like buzzing audio when you're centered on an observer. Like things like this. Could
People
be
don't
like
do
an
the little
audio
zoom in
warning
trick.
that an observer is nearby. This way, you still force your opponent.
This
to
isn't
have some type of
interesting.
detection there, but it also alerts.
I hadn't
them
thought
that there's
about
an
that.
observer, because it's very frustrating for the other two races when they're not aware that there's an observer near. So whenever they're
Yeah.
in observer mode, you could just constantly have them play like a buzzing noise or something like that. And when they're just regularly
They
flying
make a
around,
noise
not
when
have
they
that
do
be.
the
But I
little
think this is
siege
a
up, but
cool
after that,
suggestion that I never would have thought of. That I think with one or two tweaks, like I mentioned,
That's an
definitely
interesting
could
idea.
could be workable. The Phoenix from damage 5 to
What is
plus
this?
5
What
to
is this,
light to
Lowko?
6 plus 4 light. So I guess this is also a buff just in general to the Phoenix. I don't think the Phoenix needs a buff.
If the void ray gets
So-
nerfed, it's a buff to the Phoenix.
Maybe I'm just misunderstanding these things. I never.
This is
guys,
Lowko,
I barely
like, they
finished
need
high
some
school,
buffs
so
somewhere, but
once
let's
the
not
language
do
get a
any
little bit
actual real
difficult,
buffs.
I
Like,
tend to tap on
all
it.
of these are nerfs
If
to
this doesn't mean that
Protoss.
he wants to buff
There is
the
no-
Phoenix, then I don't know what it means. But if he wants to buff the
Almost
Phoenix,
all of these
then
are nerfs, actually.
I don't see any point to that.
It's very
I think the
hard to
Phoenix
buff
is in a-
things without
in a fine spot.
breaking stuff.
Some final notes here from Lowko. I'm not sure how to change these. Queens are too well rounded. This is true. The queen is too well rounded. However, the queen needs to be well rounded right now in the current state, especially to deal with Protoss threats and especially with the Void Ray. However, if we take some nerfs on the Void Ray and we'd say we increase the building time, we remove a bit of the speed, I wouldn't be necessarily opposed to removing one of the range from the queen against air. I mean, why not? That makes Oracle harass a little bit better, more incentive for Oracle harass. I think people like seeing Oracle harass. It's fun to defend, or well, fun. It's fun to do. It's fun to defend. Like, both players need to be very active with the unit. The Oracle is a unit that requires a lot of micro to control well, and the defense requires a lot of good positioning and vision on the map as well. So you have two people working very hard at either doing damage or stopping damage, and based on who is better at that interaction, you get damage. While in the case of Void Ray versus Queen, you have one guy that's sitting with his fist up his bum, and the other guy that is microing with 5 hands to get his queens in the correct positions. And then there's no reward for the Zerg player if it goes well.
Protoss in a
with
nutshell.
Oracle, they need to get close, so they either take whole damage or they don't. There's a cool little interaction there, I think, that you don't really have with Void Ray against Queen. And perhaps one range less on the Queen.
Are we going to nerf the Queen range
Could
again?
also make Hellbat All-Ins a bit stronger. Would make all the Terran harass a bit stronger. Liberators. Any type of medevac attack, obviously.
I guess that is definitely...
So
well, you
there
have
might
to
be
nerf Void
issues
Rays.
there. We could also consider lowering
To-
the Queen
to
HP, but that
change
might
the
make
Queen.
Disruptors too
Ooh.
strong against Queen if they can one-shot Queen.
No.
So there's... Yeah, they're...
The reason you can't lower the Queen HP as well, there's a reason the Ghost Snipe does 170 damage. Queens have 175 HP. It breaks a lot of stuff to lower HP on things, especially when Snipe is involved. Snipe would one-shot Queens. That's not necessarily the end of the world, but like...
There's a lot of things there. It's hard to say. I'm here with Lowko. I think Queens are too well-rounded and they require some
I
type
propose
of nerf.
armored tag.
But what that is really difficult to say without breaking any other parts in the game. Ghost. Ghost have too much power overall. I agree with Lowko. I'm not sure if an HP nerf is the correct call. I do think that Ghosts have too much power. And it doesn't necessarily mean that they're imbalanced or overpowered, but that
Thank you for
too
clarifying.
much of the Terran power in the late game is really around this one unit in the Ghost. And you'd rather have that spread among different units. And you'd have these different units kind of have their own niches in which in certain situations the Liberator is better. In other situations the Ghost is better. In other cases, again, the Tank or the Widowmine or the Thor is best. But the Ghost is kind of the catch-all response to everything late game that Zerg can throw at you. And even in... even against TOS, there's really no downside to having a couple of Ghosts. But I kind of like how they function against TOS. I'm not going to complain about that. Swarm hosts are a bit weak in standard games.
Yeah, what?
And I like that.
Who cares?
I really dislike Swarm hosts. I hate free units. I wish that unit didn't exist. The Swarm host era is
Nobody
the worst era of the entire.
on the list of
Extremely
things no one
frustrating to play
cares
against free
about.
units.
We have Swarm
I
hosts.
don't want that again. So I'd like to keep that a bit.
Uh,
No change suggested by Lowko, and no change necessary. Maybe nerf it even more, Lowko. Make them 12 supply.
Yes.
I hate Swarm hosts. Cloaked Widowmines
okay,
are kind of
that's a little bit much. I don't...
This is one of the things where I'm not entirely sure. If Widowmines weren't cloaked, they'd lose so much of their value
Bring
after the
back
armory
spider
finishes.
mines.
And
It's
then
hard.
you need to buff Terran in the mid game in some other way, and it just so many.
Just because I think we're about to get into Harstem suggestions. Now, Fusion Core and the Siege Tank. I think you might be able to go a little further. I did some math on the Siege Tank. It's very hard to just add flat damage to the Siege Tank without ruining things. Like, if you add one more damage, just one more damage on the Siege Tank, just base damage. +1 Siege Tanks, one-shot Marines after they stim. Like, right now, in TVT, the Siege Tank with +1 does 44 splash damage. The Marine has 45 HP. Like, there is a lot of crazy math. Another one is the amount of hits it takes to kill. Right now, it does 70 damage with the bonus against armored. Roaches have 145 HP. Like, it's very hard. I'm just saying, like, there's a lot of issues with, like, just doing flat damage increases or stuff like that. But I think the Siege Tank could have a bigger role. And if it had a larger role, it would make things like Widowmines and Ghosts just naturally less required.
interactions
Just
depend
in
on
general.
this, that I can't oversee what would happen if you'd go for a change there. It's yeah, I just don't know. I just don't know. I don't think you can change this. And I
I
think
tried to think about Widowmines for a
it
long
also
time.
is fine at the higher levels in a way where
And
the
you
Widowmine
can't
is
take
just
away the
beatable, and
cloak.
even at lower levels, the
Even though I
Widowmine
hate
is
Widowmines, you
unbeatable
can't
as
take
well.
away the
So
cloak.
it is
Like,
annoying.
it fills a
but
super important role.
I don't personally see it as a big issue right now. No.
It just
Okay.
removes too much.
I think that's Lowko's list. Now, I have a couple of things that I'm passionate about personally as well. So let's get into these. Now, one thing I want to talk about is the carrier and how it makes the micro very difficult, and in general the power of the A-move Airtos army. Okay? So if we have these two armies, which is like a Zerg and a Protoss army, right? For the Protoss army, with this army, you can get very far. I've seen high-level pro games in which Protoss players don't even use High Templar. They literally use a single control group, and all the micro that goes on in the entire Protoss army is this, okay? They A-move.
A-clicked.
Meanwhile, the Zerg needs to use a couple of different spells. They need to ideally
So, yeah, let's let
target
him go.
fire as well on as many units as they can. This Protoss even forgot to use the prismatic alignment for a little bit.
The joke is he's controlling both armies, by the way.
And all TOS really does here
I think he's going to lose this one.
is A-move. It's all they do.
Also, he didn't talk about
And
the
Zerg
microbial
needs to
shroud
use
thing at
3,
all.
4 different control groups. And at the end of the day, the difference in outcome isn't even this big. It looks like the Zerg here is still going to be winning because we have a bunch of units remaining. But also because they had 30 more supply. And the TOS literally did nothing. I think this is a real issue in... once again, if one player needs to do everything correct in order to have about an even fight, even when they're up in supply, or to have a better fight, that is not a good thing. If both players have a similar type of late game army and both of them just A-move, I understand that there's always going to be differences in outcome. Like one race is always going to have a slightly better.
That was not a good
non-micro
example.
army. But I think the difference in the Protoss army and the Zerg army is slightly too big, and that definitely shows.
So, I'm going to bring up, I think he might propose some things, but Harstem's directly in line with me on this. Part of the issue is a carrier existing screws up your entire army and requires the person trying to counter. He's saying it much more directly, but essentially the amount of APM you need to counter the carrier is ridiculously high compared to how hard it is to A-move the carrier. So having a lower threat priority, meaning units, maybe just air units, maybe units like the Corruptor specifically. But this has actually been done, by the way. The Thor does it. The Thor prioritizes air threats over ground threats. There is precedent for this. I would just take it from the other side, though you could easily add to the Corruptor, to the Viking, like automatic targeting of like a carrier, for example, over an interceptor within a certain range. So, that's essentially what Harstem is saying right now, is that it's way too easy. It makes it way too difficult, just the nature of the carrier as it is. Now, does he propose giving Zerg more tools or changing the carrier, is the question. Or does he just acknowledge it's a problem and move on with his life?
Goes in the lower levels. And this is two issues. One, it gives the issue that it becomes really difficult for lower level players to play late game, while it's really easy for TOS to get there in the first place, like I mentioned earlier. And second of all, it is difficult for Protoss to differentiate between the lower Grandmaster TOSes and the higher Grandmaster TOSes, as the control is very similar. There just isn't too much to do in the fights. And that is an issue. One of the ways I think that we could fix this is nerfing the carrier. I think the carrier makes fights for Zerg really difficult because of the way that interceptors interact with any army, is that the interceptors become the main target for whatever army is fighting against it that can attack air. So you saw the Corruptors just kind of bugging around, trying to look for more interceptors to kill. You always need to shift click things. Now this army didn't even have any Archons or Storm, but if you're shift clicking and the TOS has 1 or 2 Archons, or they have like 3-4 Storms, your entire Corruptor army is just going to straight up fall. Very frustrating, of course. But there's very little effort for the TOS, and I think that's an issue. So I think what should be done is I think the carrier should be nerfed into Oblivion. And when I say Oblivion, I truly just mean it should be nerfed out of the game, basically. Like I never really have in any game
Damn.
where I look at a game and think, wow, this carrier made this game better. I thought this game was a 7 out of 10 entertainment value, but after these 12 carriers came out, this became a 10 out of 10 or an 8 out of 10. It almost always, the excitement level goes down. I think that is just a bad unit. I think we're right now in StarCraft at a point where if we have a unit where the entertainment value goes down when that dude comes out, we should maybe just say, maybe we can find a niche for it, like the Battle Cruiser, where it comes out in the early game and it can harass it a little bit. Like, make it come out quick, but make the units be kind of crap. And just have it be like some type of weird all-in, or as a transition into an other build. But this shouldn't be the focus of our...
I want to say, I didn't feel qualified. Like, I also would argue, I say it as a caster. You know how I notice less people watch on YouTube for the clicks, which is why we're here. But just in general, like, my interest is on showing good games, and I don't want to sit there for 16 minutes watching someone build carriers and watching a Zerg player try to whittle them down and then lose their army to 3 storms anyways. Like, to be, he's saying it. I don't think I'd go that far. But yeah, like, I think Harstem wants good Protoss to exist. And there's a bunch of donkey toss. I'll use my own terminology. There's a bunch of donkey toss that are 98% as good as the Protoss because these tools are very easy to use. So, I would like, okay, I like your change. I don't like, he hasn't proposed a change. All he's proposed is nerf it into Oblivion. My proposed change is that the carriers are now easier to target and cost more supply, as well as take longer to build. They are your late game support, but they're also very vulnerable. They're no longer the carry, I guess, ironically, of the army. I think he hasn't proposed anything besides nerf them into Oblivion. I think this would serve to chain, if it works, as requires a ton of testing, and I'm going to need people who aren't me to come up with this, because I can barely change the stats of units in the editor. This is some complicated, relatively complicated stuff that isn't like add +1 extra damage. But it's going to take some testing. I don't think you need to nerf it into Oblivion. I think, like, maybe Morrowind would be even better. Okay. But the real issue is that the carrier just makes it impossible. The unit clutter all over the place is the issue. Like, you can't shift click because there's so much splash damage potential from the ground. If you do shift click, it's because they didn't build 2 Archons, which counter your whole army. Like, it's too much. You need 600 APM and you still usually lose. Like,
our late games, the carrier, it makes the game worse. I truly do believe that. Now I hear all of you Protoss players out there go, well, if they're touching the carrier, how am I ever going to win a late game? Because Broodlords and Infestors together are unbeatable. The second point of the plan, we also nerfed the Broodlord into Oblivion. We just destroy the stats of it, however way you want. Make it even slower, make it more supply. Like,
Harstem, I have something for you. Well, kind of. I try to be fair.
I don't really care. Like maybe make it more supply. Maybe that actually is the answer. That it's so supply inefficient that you don't really want a lot of them. It's nice to have a couple, but not too many. It's
What
not
would you
good
do to
just
buff
defend
Protoss, though,
spots with. Like
in the
need
mid
to
game?
use it as some type
How
of
do you
weird
buff
all-in
Protoss
into
in the mid game, Harstem? Tell
That's
me.
the only way that you can use it, or you're just going to lose late game fights.
I
think
want to
that would be a
know.
good
That's the
way.
most
And I really think it
controversial
is
and hardest
important
part.
that people start to realize that although the capital ships are probably designed to be late game units in a way, the more capital ships we tend to see in a late game, or the more like capital units we tend to see in a late game,
Do they not
the
need a
worse
buff
late
in the mid game
tends to
then?
be. This is the case for carriers. This is the case for Tempest in a large way. Brood Lords. I mean, they're almost naturally very campy units until you get there. So there's a long time in which you're getting this army where both guys are camping or one guy's trying to break it. And then once you have it, the game tends to move really slow because these armies are really slow and they tend to rely on a single battle. And I think
It's not good.
I think
It's
that's
not
quite
good for
bad.
casting.
I really don't like that. So that's my main point here.
So
Actually.
these are not
We went
numbers
over
or
all of Lowko's
propositions.
changes.
They're
I think I
oblivion.
had some good input there as well. But if there's one thing that I think needs fixing, it's the PvZ late game. And these would be my suggestions. It's by, first of all, making it more difficult for Protoss to get into the late game, making the early and mid game defense for Zerg weaker by slightly nerfing the Queen. So there's multiple options as well for Protoss. I don't think anyone would be happy with just having Oracle options open as Protoss. There needs to be something done that Twilight openers, the T-drops, are slightly better. And a Queen nerf, as they really do
Twilight
give a large
openers,
part
you
of that
say?
defense, would be a good start there as well. And then from
Then
there
again,
on
if
out,
he
I
was
think
looking at my changes,
you
this
can't just
video
throw
would be an
one
hour
big
and a
patch
half
at it,
long.
but maybe multiple small patches or one bigger patch and then kind of tweak it. But this requires an active Blizzard Activision, and that might be difficult to achieve. All right. It kind of became a bit ranty at the end. I'm sorry for that. I'm also sorry if I forgot anything. I know some of you probably want to hear about Disruptors against Terran or Dark Templars, but I think these are rather
PVT
minor
is
issues.
fine. It's
And
just always been. It's at least it's
I don't really
active.
see too much
Like,
wrong. There's
PVT is
something wrong with
active.
it, but we can get into it maybe another time if I feel like making another video. That's going to be it for me today, actually. Thanks to Lowko for having this beautiful little document that inspired me to make this video. For the people that expected a StarCraft today, I'm sorry for that as well, but it's not happening because just not a lot happened in the past week. Only an EPT Cup. I think Zest won 2 of them. I could be wrong.
Classic.
I'll have a look. I'll do it next week.
He just skipped
Alright,
over the
it's gonna be it
microbial
for me
shot. That
today.
was the
Thanks all so
best
much for watching.
suggestion
If
of
you have
all
any
of them.
thoughts yourself on balance, be sure to leave them down below in the comments.
Got some ideas.
If you don't have any thoughts on balance, then just actually give me your favorite pasta recipe in the comments in that case.
Very good.
And
Very
if you
good.
do have thoughts on balance, but they're kind of disjointed, just press the like button. Okay, we don't want to hear from you.
Good talk. Good talk. Well, fair enough. So the summary is Harstem and I are on the same page. I would love, honestly, I want to know how he feels about, because as much as I can be a little salty about Lowko's changes, which were partially based on my changes, even though we didn't talk about my changes here. And Harstem is more of an authority than me. I'm just here to show good games for the fans. I don't feel qualified to say nerf the carrier into oblivion, though I wouldn't be disappointed if that's what we did. So instead of a theory crafting effort from me, the intent is to create an extension mod that you can apply to any melee map in SC2, super easy. You can just literally add anything. Like, yada yada. Balance. Well, there was the balance test mod here. Something like this. Balance mod Lowko. Wait, Lowko's already implemented by Stone Days. All right, Mr. Stone. But there are very easy ways to do that. So, but the idea is to be a little more thorough about it. honestly, this started as let's nerf the Void Ray, let's adjust the Queen. But I think at this point, and Harstem touched on it, without an official update, aka Blizzard, it's hard to get any popularity, but I don't see why I or Lowko or Harstem can't sponsor some pro gamers to play and then completely ignore all the balance changes and play the same way. Anyways, so the reason I came up with this at all, and I've been saying for a while, like, this is the only way anything's going to happen. Inspired by Age of Empires 2 and how it was essentially before Definitive Edition, at some point, you use the tools you have. And unfortunately, right now, the tools we have are a community effort, an interest, and a limited scope. What that means is essentially just people playing a balance mod. Getting it onto an official ladder or anything of that would be very difficult. But I think, well, it originally started because coping mechanic, mostly. Because I don't think it's very likely we'll get regular or significant balance changes based on the past 2 years. So I kind of just decided I'll do it. And here we are. Thank you to my Dutch counterparts. I hope this creates more interest, and obviously it very much does. And I hope you keep that interest and that commentary going into the future. Give me your least favorite pasta recipe if you don't have any thoughts. And if you do have balanced thoughts, well, you're not special. And stop complaining, Terran players. Think about it. And then write them down. Thank you for watching. Good luck. Have fun.